Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today David Duford. He is an insurance broker, in a sense. He mentors other insurance agents in end-of-life insurance, final insurance, he calls it, largely burial insurance, as other issues that may be involved at the end of life. So who would be interested in this? You may be listening to this and going, okay, where does that fit with being in a leadership role, being CEO of an organization, and looking at legacy building and what's next in your life? So David reaches out to people who you may have in your employment who have perhaps been hourly workers and have not planned well for their retirement or have not been able to. They may be disabled. They may have physical ailments that prevent them from being able to have really planned carefully and are thinking about needing to do something for their life. So I'm going to have David explain a little bit more fully what it is that he does. But for those hourly workers, especially that you may have in your employment, this may be something you want to consider. At least let people know of its availability to them so they can be more thoughtful about their life, especially towards its end. So David, it's yours. Please explain to everybody what it is that you do and how you go about it and how you help people.
Thank you, Lois. Greetings and salutations, everybody. I'm David Duford. Thanks for having me on, Lois. I appreciate it. So I operate what's called Duford Insurance Group. I help agents and mentor agents to help people like Lois is describing to get what's called final expense, end of life burial insurance. It's insurance to cover final expenses like cremations and burials and funeral expenses across the nation. And basically, kind of our target market of people that we help are generally, as I'm kind of hearing, are more along the lines of your blue collar Americans. They're people who are working at an entry level. They've worked all their lives. They've worked hard, but they've gotten to the point where they are getting close to retirement. They can't necessarily take those benefits that they had during their employ with them into retirement, but they still need some kind of coverage because many people are retiring with less money than they thought they would. Money's not going as far as it used to be. And as people transition into the retirement, there's a shift in kind of perception that happens. One from which is we call accumulation to distribution. In other words, retirees start worrying, well, how can I survive on what I've got? I can't go out and make as much as I used to. And so now I have to start planning for the remainder of what life I have left. And many times the conversation and the concern eventually comes around, paying for final expenses, funerals, cremations, and that kind of thing. And that's what we do. We help average Americans that have worked hard their whole lives, make sure that they have the kind of peace of mind in their retirement so that they don't have to burden predominantly their loved ones like their spouses or their kids with any sort of final expenses, which and when we're targeting this particular group of people can be completely devastating. So we go out and do a service, help them out, and try to leave their lives a little bit better than had we not been able to.
So David, what does final insurance cost? What does a person need to plan for? And if you thought about it over 10, 15 years, are they paying in more than they're going to get back?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, cost is just completely contingent on the age of the client and as well as their health too. We do what's called simplified issue insurance products. That simply means that we don't do your run-of-the-mill examinations. You probably think, like most people, you get a life insurance policy, you have to take blood, you've got to pee in a cup, that kind of thing. Not necessary with final expense. They pull your information on the spot, medical information, and determine insurability immediately. And there's some built-in flexibility in underwriting so that even people who are a little bit older, maybe they're not in the perfect shape, they may have even had cancer or heart attacks in the past, can still qualify for some kind of coverage. So this is a blessing for a lot of people because in our particular market, people wait sometimes too long and aren't as eligible for coverage, where we have the ability to be flexible and help them with a policy where maybe prior to that, they never knew there was an option. As far as how cost is accumulated over time, one of the downsides of our product is there is the potential to overpay versus the amount of coverage that one receives. There's some ways that you can work around that. You can do what's called paid up plans, where you pay off the plan, if you will, but you still keep the insurance, like paying off your car. You still get to drive the car. It's the same concept with some of these life insurance products where you pay up the premiums in order to get a better, I guess, premiums in, coverage out kind of situation. And on the flip side, the other thing too is that even if the client can't afford maybe the plans that will pay up, the good news is that this is something that many times they really don't have any other options to help. A lot of our clients didn't save their money. They're not prepared as best as they could. And they run the risk of, well, they could save their money instead, but what if they run out of time before they save up enough money? And so it's not a perfect scenario. You can't always get, the upper hand, I guess you can say, but we still can offer some people who've, put off this planning some kind of coverage that will do good by a lot of people.
So let's say you're 55, you're looking at retiring in the next 10 years or so. You have some back issues, you've got but a fairly reasonable health. What would you look at paying if you were in that sort of position and you've been a factory worker, and so you've been dependent on hourly wages, you're financially making it, but not making a lot of extra money?
Sure. Assuming somebody's in decent shape, probably in the $25 to $35 a month range in order to get the kind of coverage to pay for, say, a basic funeral, which around, depends where you live, it's about $10,000. Which is going up in pricing, but that's another thing to discuss. So it's reasonably priced, $1 a day, give or take, maybe no more than $1.50 to $2 a day. And, maybe some people don't want that much. They can opt for more. There's many plans that will allow a person to start with several thousand in coverage to make the price even less. And there's the ability to do more than just that much. Maybe somebody just wants enough to cover final expenses and they want 25 or 50,000. There's the ability to go higher as well.
Got it. So when a person's making a choice like that, let's say as an employer, you're looking at benefits that you want to have available to your employees so you can really be a responsive, attentive employer. What should an employer think about as this concept is made available or discussed as part of the benefits program, or at least something that it may not be in their benefits program, but something that they tell people that they should consider?
Sure, that's a really good question, because where our opportunity to help people comes from, I would argue, is because of a lack of either planning on the side of the individual, the worker, or from a standpoint of employee benefits on the employer side. And it may sound kind of funny. I'm about to tell you how to not have to use us, but that's okay, because a lot of people, become sick and ill and they can't work anymore. And while we may be able to get them coverage, had they had some options at the employer level prior, they may have gotten much better coverage overall. So the one way I think that employers can best serve their employees is to offer voluntary payroll deduct plans. Many of you probably already have some sort of programs in place where there's certainly health insurance and maybe indemnity plans like cancer or accident plans. I really feel strongly about life insurance of some sort. where not just a group insurance policy. This is usually where the employee pays a small amount per month, if anything at all. The problems with those is typically they cancel upon disability or retirement or quitting or leaving the job, and they're unable to be carried. And even if they do, many of them cancel out at 65 or 70, right about the time when they're most needed. A voluntary payroll deduct plan, which you can set up with a lot of different benefits organizations, allows the client to carry the policy with them when they retire or when they become disabled. And without evidence of insurability, meaning they don't have to reapply because their health changed. They get to keep that plan they kept the whole time. And to me, this is incredibly valuable, especially people who are in their 40s and 50s and health starts to change and circumstances happen we can't account for. That ultimately is really the best thing I think an employer can provide, at least is that opportunity for the client to at least have the option to consider carrying their own private plan that is offered through some sort of benefits enrollment that they can carry on into their retirement. So they don't have to talk to us necessarily, and maybe you're in a position where they would have had to pay more. They can lock in a better price, possibly better coverage too. That's really the best scenario.
So the burden of insurance, health insurance in particular, payroll tax, the various deductions, for employers, the burden of that has increased over the years, right? And so from a employer profitability, that becomes a concern, right? And so there's always that struggle between, do you have full-time employees? Do you have contract workers? How do you look at your employee pool in order to manage your expenses? Because you have to be profitable if you're going to survive also as a company. So how do you help frame this discussion for owners, business owners?
Right. So good question. The pitch we have is with voluntary payroll deduct. It is an option that you as an employer can give to your employees, but many of the plans don't require any expense on behalf of the employees. Okay. Or I'm sorry, on behalf of the employer. So you're able to offer a suite of benefits, but not necessarily have to pay for the expense. The option is there if the employer wants to pay the expense, but it gives the perception that, you were just not working for a wage or, an income. But now that you offer some suite of benefits, which is a value add, and the pitch is, hey, if you are an employer and you have these additional options available to your clients or to your employees, then they're going to value the relationship and employment that much better. So the nice thing, again, with what I just described earlier, the voluntary payroll deduct type of plans, is that in most cases the employer pays nothing at all. It's a cost that's the interested employees carry on their own, and frees the employer up from having another expense on top of the many other ones that they have to worry about.
So perhaps in today's world where we're becoming more competitive in terms of having employees available, it's a shrinking workplace in many ways. It is something that's worth thinking about because it may be perceived as a valuable asset, especially for your midlife employee. What would be the biggest reasons you wouldn't want to buy something like this?
A good question. If there are no economic concerns with paying for final expenses, for example, if you're retired or close to retirement and you have complete assurance that between your investments and retirement strategy that there's enough money to fund a funeral, then the need for a product like this decreases. I wouldn't necessarily, some people need things and some people want them. There's a lot of people that buy our type of products that don't necessarily need them. They're just the kind of person that feels comfortable with insurance. And they like the idea of having an extra layer of security just in case things change. I've had clients who've had to drain their savings because their kids, had addiction problems and they put them through, recovery programs and never expected that. But they had a policy to cover what we know is going to happen, which is death, right? So it really just comes down to the comfort of financially of the person in retirement, weighing what they have versus what could happen. That's going to really, I think, help go a long way to determine, is this something that I need or want? And how much should I really get this, and how much of an impact is it going to make?
So, David, anything we haven't talked about that people should know about as they think about their end of life and planning for it?
Well, bottom line, we all have a funeral. We just don't know when the date is. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And the sooner you take care of something like this, the better. Health from day to day is not guaranteed. We all know people who have been healthy one day and tragedy struck the next. This is something that's not just true about burial insurance, but any kind of insurance need. You always want to have your insurance arranged before you actually need it, right? Because many times when you need it, you can't qualify for it. So bottom line, I think when it comes to having an acknowledgement that this is something that's important, get it while you can. It's always the cheapest when you're healthy and you don't need it and you're not ready to use it right now. Hopefully none of you are, but it's always a good idea, I think, to tap into that while you can, so that you don't have to worry about burdening loved ones or putting somebody in a position where, God forbid, they'd have to carry this cost themselves.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for your insights on this. It's certainly not something that I think most of us have at the top of our list, but as you say, it is something we all have to think about at some point. Someplace, either we think about it, our children or our family think about it. We will have some information about David and his company in the show notes. So if you would like to contact him, you will be able to do so. So thank you, David, for being with us today. And for those of you who are listening to us today, thank you for being with Building My Legacy podcast. And please remember to visit our website at buildtomorrow.com and our social media sites as well at buildtomorrow.com. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.